Hello, everyone. You are listening and watching several different channels. Many of them have Rashkin in their name, but one of them has Silicon Curtain name.
Yeah.
And that means that this is Yuri Rashkin, and joining me, Jonathan Fink, host of Silicon Curtain. And we're here, just two of us today. This is all just rebuilding the excitement for Konstantin Samoilov joining us at some point in the future. But the key is that we are here. Look at this. We're even streaming on Silicon Curtain right
We
now.
are here. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was in a daydream and I forgot to press the button. So they've missed the first like 3 seconds, but anyway, they'll get the important
intro
stuff.
with a shark. Mwah, it's good stuff. Okay. Well, if they missed it, that's okay. You know what? Welcome. Please press like, subscribe, do all the things that decent people do. Don't speak to 800 generals. That's probably something that decent people don't do for no reason. Don't gather 800 generals for no reason and speak at them. Don't do that. But
don't do that.
I think
or tell them to shave or point out their general, body fat index, etc., etc.
I just have come to a conclusion that I think MAGA means decent people don't do things like that.
Yes. Yeah. That's a good shorthand for it.
Kind of sure, because like decent people wouldn't do what Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump did, but they do it every day. All right. So how did that look from did you totally miss it? Did you like not notice?
Oh no, I was glued to that. I haven't gone through and parsed every word of the speech, and I think there's some important stuff that it's worth really, cogitating and thinking about. But of course, the phrase came out, enemies from within. The fact that none of these generals clapped at the end, they just all sat there stony-faced, because it's like, we don't do politics, right? So we're not going to be visibly drawn into this. We've been ordered to come here, and so we're here. But beyond that, there seemed to be no actual engagement except sitting there and being harangued. The question in my mind is, what happens next? What happens when they're asked to follow orders that are technically illegal, that could be framed as not in the spirit of the American armed forces? What's going to happen when actually the crunch comes?
Actually, the bad news is we know already what is starting to happen, because I think the general in charge of like Air Force Strike Force has just announced that he is retiring. So I think that's part of what we're starting to see next, is we're going to see people who are going to be saying, bye-bye.
I'm out. I'm out. That is, dare I say it, that is non-confrontation with evil breeds evilish. If you look at Hannah Arendt and other philosophers of this, just saying I will not be complicit in the horror will not make the horror end or diminish its impact.
No, this is a very selfish decision where they're saying that they don't need this crap. And they don't, and a lot of people are going to leave, and that's part of how institutions crumble. It's not because they're necessarily replaced with bad actors. They're just not good people leave and nobody comes back. But then you have situation where you have people who will say, well, if it's not me, it will be somebody worse than me, so I might as well stay. But I think when it comes to military, it's a very clear line of following Constitution. So that's where it's really important that we do have good people there.
Yeah. And if you're staying to be an impediment, then actually that's great. As indeed, Mark Milley and others who were actually involved in the Trump regime first time around, they made a point of staying, and it's like hanging around in the worst possible place with the worst possible people, so you can be that kind of barrier to all the worst things actually happening.
It's almost like you're in the military going to war.
It is. But you're going to war to try and prevent actually your leadership from taking the worst possible decisions.
Because you have to protect. That's what military is supposed to do.
Through persuasion to start with, but if you need to be a kind of just a rigid barrier to stop it happening, then do that. But we're beyond that point, aren't we? I mean, they're at the point now where they're trying to force resignation, where they're trying to whittle people out, find excuses to fire people. This is the Doge version of the military. But in this instance, it's not to save money, it's to remove anyone who does not show the suitable, dare I say it, genuflections before power, not the constitution of the people, but before power.
It's not even so much the doging of it as it is just the policy of this administration to place somebody in charge of any agency whose mission seems to be to destroy the agency. The thing is that when we have that happen to our Department of Education, then it will have certain kind of consequences for education of our children, for ours, and so on. When we put Robert F. Kennedy in charge of Jr. in charge of healthcare, and we see Department of Healthcare being destroyed, that will have its own consequences. But when you destroy Pentagon, that it's on several levels, because on one level it's an insult to everybody who sits there. But then the other part is the national security of the actual United States, if not beyond. Because our enemies are laughing at us. This is if you were Putin, how would you feel about looking at that speech by Hexat? This is just like order pizza and get popcorn. This is great.
On the other hand, as well, it's they might be looking at this and going, "Well, that's how proper empires run themselves. That's the kind of obsequiousness I expect within my hierarchy." It's a reassertion of the natural order of things. So they may not be entirely looking at it with the same derision that we are, but they will be looking at it and say, okay, finally, we've exported some of our values there. Finally, these things that we don't comprehend, these sort of values of so-called freedom, which we just think are hypocrisy and invention, no, they're finally being replaced by proper things, a proper hierarchy, a proper genuflection to power, a proper vertical that whittles out any kind of dissent or innovation or even leadership skills. Who needs all that stuff?
I think that's a really insightful look at the situation, but I think in the end it comes down to this means chaos, and if there's chaos in the United States, then it's good for Russia.
That's also, because the United States is still the enemy. I mean, despite the media and Trump and his circle at various points flip-flopping, and this is a really, I'd love to know your view on this one. Despite all of that sort of theater of politics, are Trump and Putin buddies? They not, blah, blah, blah. It still seems to me that Russia, Putin especially, will always think of the US as the natural enemy, and the main strategy is to destroy it, prevent a resurgence of the democratic and strong US from re-emerging.
I think that is the tragic narrative to this love story, that Donald and Vladimir really can't be together, because ultimately Vladimir just hates Americans.
Their families disapprove.
Yeah, because sometimes they have a lot in common, but in other ways they're still Russians and Americans. But Donald doesn't, our president, number 47, the most random number, doesn't seem to have any problem, of course, of worshiping Putin. It's interesting to me to watch. Maybe you can help me clarify what I'm seeing, because it looks like Trump really would like the war to end. And because it's a deal, it's a all of those things that he values, but he is refusing to put any pressure on Russia. And even when he is doing the tomahawk dance that he's doing right now, and then we see Putin dance in return, because clearly Trump was hoping that he could give these tomahawks to Ukraine and Putin wouldn't mind or notice, because it's just business. We're clearly not gonna fight each other, so let's make some money. But Putin responds like, no, this is really gonna hurt our relations. This is gonna be bad. This is not good.
Yes. No slap and tickle for you, Mr. Trump, tonight. Right? You've been a very bad vassal.
Bad boy, yes.
it's a curious one, and the other thing with the Tomahawks is, I think I get the impression that many of them are near or past their sell-by date. So actually, it's not just business. Like, we can save some money by offloading this stuff. We don't have to, we don't have to dispose of it, which is expensive. Let's just let it go bang somewhere. It's much, much cheaper. As you say, this is just
I
business.
think that there's a possibility of making a deal with like a discount if you also get a submarine.
Yes, that's right. I mean, this so-called love story, a West Side Story, it ain't, and the soundtrack is not a patch on the original. There are curious, of course, we've seen the media immediately that they just flip-flop all over the place. They're taken in by the theater. They don't question. They don't put it in context. I'm talking about the mainstream here. There are some great correspondents who are doing great stuff and great analysis, but by and large, the core narrative really seems to fall into Russia's traps every single time. And many of our leaders will fall into the reflexive control, and willingly the media will jump in like lemmings. But there are a couple of little notes in there which I find kind of curious. For instance, we don't look at the words, we look at the actions. But one action that has taken place is that Trump has, apparently this has actually happened, they are now passing over improved intelligence and targeting data about Russia's energy infrastructure. So that's interesting. I mean, that's tangible. That's,
and I'm really hoping
bolder than what we've seen before, as well, under Biden. Even that they really, I mean, we remembered that Sullivan jumped on a plane to try to persuade Ukraine please not to hit Russian energy infrastructure. That's a step too far, just die quietly. But this is not
it's amazing when you think that you might have to fight Russia, and so you're trying to lower that, versus we just know you're not going to fight Russia, and so you totally approach things differently. This escalation business, like, come on, like who it's just Trump and Medvedev going back and forth on Twitter. Oh, this is terrifying. So, but I just am fascinated by the fact that like news media is now trusted by 8% of Republicans. So there's information, there's lots of disinformation, and I guess this gives me opportunity to say a couple of words about my bow tie here, because I save it for special occasions. Yes,
you haven't pulled it because you thought Konstantin was going to be on the show. That was it,
That's what it is. Yes, it's actually, I was sitting and recording, and I thought, oh, what the heck? Maybe I'll just, this opportunity to talk about it. But I have a friend who writes newscasts, basically, and they're like Facebook posts, and they share the news of what's happening in America. And he does these 3 times a week, and they're about 10-15 minutes if you read them out loud. And I enjoy doing it because I've been looking to be like a news anchor. But alas, I live in Wisconsin. Life is what it is. So I enjoy being, a newscaster on my own channel. But lo and behold, the newscast is, kind of catching on. It's pretty popular in Ukraine and other places. And now that Voice of America is really no more, then it kind of like, this is it. You're looking at Voice of America now. And it's in, just, I guess, the wild west of YouTube that we live in, where I can do that. But that's what this is about. So to distinguish my usual meanderings from very organized and structured speech by Professor Igor Eisenberg, I make this very official and make it look stately as much as I can. And then people go, wow, this reminds me of the Soviet news.
Yeah. I'll say he scrubs up well, doesn't he? Showing due deference there, which I notice notably absent from our conversations there. No need to scrub up for us, but I'm not, that's appropriate.
No, but I try, but there's so much news out there, and it's hard for people to figure out what to follow and what to pay attention to.
It's a tidal wave, isn't it? It's a tidal wave. I mean, I just had my conversation before this one, but it's actually going to be published afterwards. Is going to be titled, I think you'll quite like this one, Back in the USSA. And I've got the Union of
Soviet
socialist
Socialist
states
American.
socialist states of America. Yeah.
Okay.
And by that we mean, national socialism, which is emerging. But we were talking about the point where we get very distracted by left-right labels, and this is a partisan battle between ideologies. In fact, it's ultimately a battle between democracy and the democratic culture, irrespective of whether it's left, right, hard left, far right. Doesn't matter, actually. It's those who seek to win and govern without consent of the people and with doing away those mechanisms. That is what we're ultimately fighting here. And I think that's what's useful to focus on. And when I say USSA, it's not that, right-wing America is wrong. It's that certain people in power at the moment are seeking to destroy democratic norms and introduce a Soviet mindset which is of conformity, a Soviet mindset which is of extreme managerial behaviors that doesn't question authority, that if you see anything that smells of sort of innovation, you have to kind of stamp it out. Anything that's different that you can't co-opt or control has to be kind of destroyed. And we're seeing, I think, an import of that way of thinking. It's very dangerous.
I couldn't agree more with you. I feel that this is really something that I would call like a slave mindset, because these are people, this is the mindset of people who feel like they have no choice other than to survive themselves, and that's all they can do, and they have no power, and and they're disempowered. And I find that on a personal level very abhorrent. It makes me mad when I see people who disempower themselves and presume that they have no agency when they do, because now they're actually surrendering. I think that this is the when I first started doing this, and I thought that I was dealing with just the fact that I don't live within Russian community, which I think is really radicalized. Russian-speaking community outside of Russia, I consider them to be no less radicalized than some other religious. They just don't wear like a certain look, but they have a certain lack of smile. A t-shirt and jeans. But
I saw this back in the 90s. I mean, I already spotted that in the 90s here as well. Very good friends I had who...
And part of it, of course, is because they never stopped watching Russian Soviet TV. This is still their communication method. This is where they still get the world view of who is, Democrats, they're always terrible. Republicans, they're always great. They're always wonderful. It's this kind of they're always there. But it's now seems like many other groups are in that vein and are radicalized on their ethnic kind of level. But the thing that puzzles me about Soviet Russian speakers is that they are quite well educated. We often talk about how it is the lack of education that defines whether you're liberal or conservative. Or if you have no education, you're going to be a Trump supporter. If you have master's degree, there's no way you're going to be a Democrat. Liberal, clearly education ruined you. Well, education didn't ruin Russian speakers. They're still just as they ever were. And so what I'm trying to figure out, and maybe that's a dangerous red flag for our education system. But apparently you can be well educated and super conservative, if dare I say racist, etc., etc.
Well, there's a nuance there, isn't there? Because education has become ever more focused on specialisms. And you can understand why that happens in the sciences. Our body of knowledge grows. It's like you can't be a Renaissance person. You can't be really doing science and history and art. And you can't.
Well, you've got
to be. Yeah, we can do everything badly to a very sort of shallow level. No, but I think that's the trick. I mean, the Soviet Union was able to educate people in the elite. Let's say it was a very elitist system because not everyone got a good education. But it's not a rounded education. It's not an education that encourages you to challenge or think. It's an education which will make you an extraordinary specialist, potentially in a certain narrow field or area. But it does not encourage thought or cross-contamination of thought. And I think to an extent, our own education systems have become quite focused in that manner, which means that when social media comes along, simplistic narratives play really well, because you can be extraordinarily well educated as a biologist, as this or that, but you can have no conception whatsoever of history. I spotted this in Silicon Valley, working with technologists back in the long time ago, in the early 2000s. I realized that these are incredibly articulate and often inventive people who are really geared on solving problems, engineering style problems, but they'll see the world in these fairly black and white, simplistic engineering terms. When you get onto cultural topics of literature and history, they'd really struggle with nuance, or the idea that might be multiple answers to a particular problem, and none of them are particularly right, and none of them are wrong. And just dealing with this kind of nuance or shades of gray or complexities of thought, not part of their.
I disagree. I think this is where I feel like it's I agree with you that it is super important, but I think that there's a different approach, because I feel like when we are saying, oh, there are shades of gray, не все так однозначно, then we are showing our inability to crystallize the situation. We are showing our inability to communicate with people clearly, because I have nothing against simple narratives. Look at Bernie Sanders. He's been very simple about his narratives for many years, and it's very clear his position, where he stands. He doesn't like rich people very much. I mean, simplistic doesn't mean that it's necessarily a horrible idea. It just means you're clear about where you stand. And I think it's okay to say that, I don't know, one party supports dictators and one party supports elections. It's a pretty simple message. It doesn't need to get complicated. So I think that I really am a fan of accessible communication and being clear in what we're trying to say, and not just kind of write it off as, oh, they're populist. Yes, if they're good and are getting their message heard, they have to be populist because of social media.
But there's a problem.
Yeah.
There's a problem here, which is that all of the people voting for Trump going out and thinking, I'm a really bad person, right? I'm going to vote for chaos and bad governance. I'm a really terrible human being, and I'm going to vote to, reduce and malign my own interests. Am I voting to destroy the Democrat? No, I would say very few, actually. I mean, some are consciously doing that, but very few of his voters will go out and say, I am voting to tear down all the things that apparently I believe in. No, they've managed to convince themselves through all sorts of contortions and narratives that they're doing the right thing, and their guys are doing the right thing, because there are these plots and these provocations and this and that and the other. What I mean by having more context is that if you had a grounding in history and you had an understanding of multiple instances of history, if you had a grounding in literature and you're able to sort of maybe parse text a little bit better and see subtext and nuance, if you'd studied politics, you'd be able to look at these things and say, well, hang on a second, we're dealing with quite a complex situation. There are several different solutions proposed. And this guy over here that's telling me it's simple, he's lying, because I've heard this pattern of speech before and I've seen what that leads to. I think people lack complex historical context to be able to parse, as you say, pretty simple things in the present. But no one's going out there and thinking, yeah, I'm going to tear the world down because I'm a terrible human being and I'm going to revel in it. The minority may think like that, but
it depends. I think that's a kind of a matter of perception, because it seems like Trump's base has really two views on government. One, it is useless and not able to do anything, and therefore we need to just cut it up for tax rebates and get rid of it. And then the other group that feels like it can be a great punitive tool to get rid of people that disagree with your point of view. And that's where I see very much, again, that slave mentality where, oh, there's no Stalin on your butt. So Stalin's going to come and take you all bad children away because there's no justice, because the system is rigged, and who's going to fix it? Oh, Trump's going to take all the Democrats away or whatever. And I think that's a little bit of the Russian joke of what's your favorite wish? To have my neighbor's cow dead. Instead of getting a good cow, wishing for your neighbor to have his disappear. It's a disbelief that people have in American dream that their life can get better. All they can do now is get even. And that's a really terrible message to put out there, because I think American dream is still accessible. It's still possible, but I think a lot of it has to do with mindset, and then realizing really the real division lines that we have that a lot of it has to do with kind of what Epstein case is all about the two Americas, where you have some people that can have anything they want and no consequences, and then there's the rest of us. So I think that there is good, clear messages that people can see that they're not with the Epstein crowd, and that's where everybody else is. And as the situation is going to continue to deteriorate, it's gonna get interesting.
It kind of is, isn't it? I mean, I'm feeling more optimistic about Ukraine, and I know from
I know, isn't that
conversations.
great? I feel more
Yes.
optimistic right now about Ukraine than about the United States at the moment. It's amazing.
Well, I'm also hoping, Ukraine will save us in some way, or at least there might be some, at least sort of little sanctuary of sanity we could all flee to when everything
Yes,
else is
yes, somewhere, yeah.
is aflame. And believe me, if Farage gets in here, yeah, I mean that's going to be interesting, just in the kind of interesting sense that you're living through. Interesting. I think we'll see a lot of the same stuff playing out about here, actually, if he manages, and it's looking like he's potentially, if it carries on this way, he could well form the next government. We'll have our own little Russian agent in charge, but Ukraine is looking more positive in that they have realized, I think back in 23, that they cannot rely on their allies to do the right thing at the scale and speed that's required. It's not they're writing their allies off and saying our allies are useless and we hate them. It's like, we appreciate what you've done for us, but we realize that your capacity to do what is required is not there. It's minimal. Your political capacity, your social capacity. Okay, fine. Right. Do what you can, we'll do the rest. And they have. They've now got these Flamingo missile complexes. They've got a whole zoo of different drones. They're even at the basic end, the FPV, they're manufacturing. I mean, we had Rogozhin, the former head of Roscosmos, going on an extended kind of whinge recently, saying that his impression is Ukraine has 10 times more personal, drones on the front than Russia's able to field. That's having a huge attritional difference. And of course, Ukraine is strangling Russia's energy supplies. If this carries on this way, I would not be surprised if they started taking out thermal power stations around Moscow in wintertime. That gets interesting. If as I know, you've been through a winter, things can get a little chilly, right?
Moscow is not a place where you want to be without heat.
No.
In winter.
Or B. You could just left it at that. B. ...
That's right. Back when I lived in Utah, I would say Utah is a great place to visit. But Moscow is not a good place to be, period. Good point. I think that on one hand, I'm super encouraged. The drones, I think, are changing. They're lifting everybody's spirits. The burning the refineries are, warming everybody's hearts. I think that's, when there's going to be in the future holiday celebrating the defeat of Russia, like a biblical thing, children will have little sparklers to highlight the burning refineries. I think that's all super great. But I also see very hopeful and suspicious Ukrainians, because they at the same time are thrilled. Why wouldn't they be, to hear this rhetoric from our president, who now is like, yeah, go get them, boys. Do whatever you want with him. He's not, he's all yours now. Goodbye. And that's encouraging. But where is action? And similarly, apparently, with flamingos, because there's a lot of talk about, but where are they? But of course, it's possible that they're being saved for some kind of a mass attack. So there's a certain amount of fog of war, which I think should keep us from getting overly excited. But I think we have plenty of reasons to be optimistic.
Yes, certainly. And that optimism, or that sort of fog of war, that ambiguity, is a good psyop for Russia as well. And it's clearly got some of the Z patriots somewhat rattled, to the point where, yes, there are physical shortages, especially in the Kuril Islands and occupied territories, but it has triggered mass panic in other areas of people trying to, panic buy fuel, which in itself triggers a cascade of shortages. So even that kind of psyop has an incredible, let's say, advantage to it. It may turn out that they actually have that many flamingos, and goodness, a mass attack of those on, say, Moscow's power nodes would be quite something to behold. I expect they're holding that back for if Russia does something appalling.
Maybe
And
that's
let's
what,
face it,
maybe that's what for thermal stations.
yes. I mean, Zaporizhia, we've had 2 incidents in the last week. One
Right.
is the artillery shelling of the sarcophagus or shell around Chernobyl. Extremely worrying. No reports of leaks there. We've also had some issues around, power to the Chernobyl to keep that sort of, not the reactor ticking over, but the processes there that prevent the radiation from leaking. We've also had extraordinary there's a period whereby the systems in the Zaporizhia GES or nuclear station have not had the required electricity. Now, that's not to say it's about to go critical or anything, but I don't put it past Russia, let's say, fomenting or fostering a nuclear crisis for its own ends. China may have said don't use any tactical nukes, but
could this be just another reminder to Trump not to give the tomahawks, because who knows what will happen in Chernobyl? There's such a nice nuclear powered station here. You wouldn't want something to happen to it.
Yes, you wouldn't fall down a set of stairs,
Right. Or buried at a golf course. Yes, that would be terrible. Yeah.
But I wouldn't put it past them. I mean, I think Kakhovka was underplayed in the Western media. The horrific impact, the horrific act of doing that, whether or not they intended those consequences to be at that scale or not, there's some suggestion that perhaps they were just, really stupid and they wanted a small provocation and they got a big one. But it doesn't matter. I mean, that was an act of extraordinary criminality against Ukraine, against its population, and against the environment. So that absolutely, there's no limitation. If they thought it was strategically useful, they could get away with it. I mean, that would already be the power station would already be a sort of charred, glowing pile of radioactivity.
I mean, they could just explode all the nuclear devices in Russia right now if they really just wanted to mess things up. I mean, they don't care.
Well, Margarita Simonyan suggested that, I think, some time back. Did you catch that one?
No, I just made up that on my own.
No, she's actually said that. About a year and a half ago. She came on. She said, "Well, look, if we want to really terrify the West, why don't we explode a nuclear bomb on our territory? No one's telling us we can't do that." And even her fellow propagandists are like, "Margarita, what are you flipping talking about? Just
she sounds like President Trump." Yes. Who is getting ready to go attack our own cities, because no one can tell us we can't do that. There's no Canada to stop us from attacking Houston.
That's also true, isn't it? The UN isn't going to send peacekeepers. It's you're on your own, guys, with that one. So what is going to happen? Because those phrases terrify me, because I don't just look at Trump and go, he's an idiot and every word he says is false. No. Like a classic Bond villain, both Putin and Trump will often tell you what they're about to do, and we ignore it, or we laugh, or we think that's ludicrous. Of course, he's not going to do that, and we don't pay attention to the words at our peril. So what's going to happen?
I think it's a matter of time. It's a question of time, because if Trump has more time, he will keep looking for enemies everywhere he can find them. And that's going to be the mood where everyone's going to be. We're not talking so far about Russian style enemy search. We're looking right now at things like Trump demanded that Microsoft fire a woman that they hired from Justice Department. And because she worked and Trump hates her from when she worked for Biden, then he wants her fired now that she is now that she works for Microsoft. Then we also see that he's got people who are checking people's like mortgage applications to see, because we have several people, for some reason, including everybody who checks those papers as well, because then their papers get checked and they are guilty of the same thing. So this projection business is crazy. But people are supposed to mark on their mortgage applications whether this is going to be their primary residence or secondary residence or investment home. And people often have been known to mark things incorrectly in order to get a lower interest rate, because you consider to be less risky investment if it's your own home and not some other investment property that you're buying. So because you're going to get rid of that if there's problems, but you're going to keep, you know how it works. And so I think that this is where hunt for danger within is just if we see that. Like, I'm really curious, again, going back to the beginning of our conversation, what happens when 800 generals are pulled into this mess? They thought that they could like sit outside and watch all of this walk by. They're going to be part of this. And that's when we see one of them retiring, and we'll see what happens to the rest. But I mean, we're not a kind of a country where military leadership like looks and says, well, civilians have failed, and then takes over. But there's a lot of people who are in comments about this on social media. You see, they're like, they are our only hope. Like, you know, people were asking if Biden will have time to declare, whatever military, whatever it's called in before he left office, because people were concerned. People are more concerned now, and we're basically seeing that rather than having like a standard politician, old-fashioned politicking, where he's like, oh, you didn't vote for me this time, what can I do for you so that you would vote for me next time? You know, that kind of thing. No, now it's like, oh, you didn't vote for me, well, I guess I'm going to take away your water, I'm going to take away your medication, I'm going to, because you didn't vote for me. What? It's just a flipping democracy around, and we're seeing, because like when there's attack and there's legally speaking, we see two, I think, former directors of FBI now one under indictment, Comey, and second, Ray. The Trump said that he doesn't know, but there might be just wink wink investigation against him as well. I mean, yes, it should send a message to current director of FBI that, like, hello, you could be next. Like, follow
Cash Patel, though, isn't it?
Right.
So he's okay.
Oh no, he's a beautiful, he's a kind wizard, Cash, or whatever it is he described himself in his book. But these people are not acting like there's going to be another election. They're not acting like they're ever going to be held accountable for their actions. And,
well, 2028 hats. They were trolling this week with the 2028 caps on the desk of the. I mean, that's imagine Biden had done anything like that. They'd have lost their minds.
Something I learned from Aider Mujdabayev about the aesthetic of these things. The aesthetics, precedes. Was it yes? I have to remember the quote more precisely, but it's the look of these things. You know, I went to Republican convention when they were here in Milwaukee, and it's a look. They look a certain way, women look a certain way, men look a certain way, and of course, Cash Patel doesn't fit into that in any way. But it's a style, and Democrats have their own style, and they have their own like moral codes and ethics codes, and it's amazing to what extent people live next to each other physically, but on the inside, we're really live in different places for a pretty long time already.
And that's dangerous, isn't it? That's when that happens and you start othering or alienating and saying, right, I mean, the very idea when this all kicked off in Trump's first term, that he would be implying that, you have more in common with Russians, your natural enemy, than you do with Democrats. It's this very idea, which now is being crystallized in the enemy within. It's that very idea that there's no point of commonality. In Britain, we're not at that point, and we saw at the last election, the Prime Minister lost, the previous Prime Minister, and the new Parliament, they seem to be chatting and laughing and shaking hands as they don't agree with each other on policy. They probably think that each other's decisions are appalling. They may not even be particularly sociable, but they can talk on a certain level. They can interact on a certain level. They do not see themselves as enemies of society. And I think that's a tipping point, which is extremely dangerous. Just for my point here, ICE is operating in red and blue states, or is that a really, really naive question? Is Trump only really sending National Guard and ICE at scale into largely sort of Democrat-controlled cities?
That seems to be, for the most part, what we're seeing now. But at the same time, we see this, I think it's starting to spread based on the availability. I had a hearing that was canceled because I'm a court interpreter among many hats that I wear. And somebody that needed my services was picked up by ICE. So like, oh, that hearing is both okay, just that calendar. So on some level, it's everywhere. On the other hand, it's designed for maximum visibility because they are, I think, trying to get people to self-deport. And they're trying to, and it's an interesting situation because we can have jobs needed, but people who live here still don't want to go work in the fields. But if situation continues to deteriorate, are we going to have like prisoners collecting things on fields? Where is all of this robots? There's all sorts of possibilities, but right now it's basically scaring the wits out of some people. And for Trump, it seems like everything that takes place that he does is either designed to distract us from the Epstein case or to help him in some way in the 26 midterm elections. And this situation with sending ICE into big cities, I was speaking with a neighbor yesterday about, I guess, ICE agents dropping off a helicopter on a building in Chicago, and like, because there's supposedly some gang members. Besides the fact that what the hell is going on, it's obscenely expensive. And, but I guess they have budgets for those kinds of toys now. And then they have Black Hawk helicopters for immigration services. That's fine now because it looks good.
They have a big budget. I mean, I think we talked about that in a previous episode. Huge budget. It's like 5 times more than the FBI now. It's huge.
Yeah, and it highlights to what extent Stephen Miller right now, who is like an aide, but is functioning as an unofficial prime minister of this country, which is really fascinating because he's like the last person that I think anybody would want in charge of anything. But he just represents, the mood. And then you have Trump base that this is being done for to pacify them, to make them happy. So
you wouldn't even want your Big Mac and chips from that guy. I mean, if you saw his face at the booth, you'd be like, I'm not sure I want him handling my food, let alone my
I know
country.
how that burger got to be that orange. Yeah, I mean, it's a, and you have, again, division where you have some people, 90% of Republicans who think that they support president. But the one poll that I do like, I'm trying to kind of compare the numbers that are, because there's a lot of numbers that are flying out. And one poll direction is that 90% of Republicans support Trump. We see this over and over. But at the same time, there was a poll that speaks about how satisfied are you with the state of things in the country. And in June, 75% of Republicans were satisfied, saying the country is moving in the right direction. But now in September, that number down to like 45%. So it's an interesting comparison, like, dichotomy or something, where they have, on one hand, they support the president, but the country is doing worse and worse, but they still support the president. I think because being of political persuasion in the United States these days is like akin to religion.
That's it. Again, sort of cult-like behavior. So 2 years ago, I thought it'd be good to get someone who's an expert on cult mentality and helping to decode people, as it were, after they've been in a cult environment. And that just seemed to be super appropriate to the situation we're in. But when you're dealing with people who are not just brainwashed on a massive scale, or these narratives are still persistent. How can you detox people when they are literally not even ankle deep, waist deep, neck deep in the same kind of sewage that led us to this problem? That's one of the things. And you've got Elon Musk, who controls the platforms, who controls literally the sewage pipe.
And it's actually, well, I'll agree with you on 2 things. First of all, I think the detox is a problem because how do you get somebody out of a cult, or how do you liberate Jews from the concentration camp if America is the problem? Like, who is going to save America now? Like Mars? Not likely. I don't know. That huge thing is flying towards us. That's supposed to be a spaceship. I don't know if that arrives. We'll talk about it then. But the other thing is detox about social media, because what's happening with TikTok right now, we have basically Trump and his supporters and his donors buying out this like cocaine thing from China, or opium, I guess would be maybe more appropriate comparison, that this TikTok that people are just hooked on. And it's now, guess what kind of stuff it's going to show if it's going to be owned by people that like and support Trump. So I'm only hoping that that's going to kind of hurt, because free market doesn't work like that. And if people see that this is BS that they don't like, they'll just shift to something else. But if there's just a little bit more of Trump things and a little bit less of other things and a little bit more and a little bit, at what point will they notice? And will it be after the elections? Who knows? But we seem to be, that's the beauty of America. We always, every election, we fall for some new ruse. It's like, oh, what's going to be exciting? How are we going to get fooled this time? And then it'll be like, won't get fooled like that again.
It's the Russia Today kind of mechanic, isn't it? As you say, it's well, back when it was trying to get under the radar, you'd have 90% of what supposedly could be called editorial, although you curate it to show the problems in your adversary's country, never solutions, and then you inject sort of 5-10% of overtly politicized content. Of course, that quota moved up considerably. But I was listening to, there's two guys here in the UK who do some interesting soft political stuff, called Rory Stewart and Mr. Alistair Campbell, who used to be the spin doctor, press doctor for Tony Blair, and he's much reviled by the media because he was very kind of effective and reputedly he was very foul-mouthed and quite tough with them. But they were talking about an experiment that was run in Europe through various social media platforms, including some of the ones we've mentioned, where they set up 5 profiles, one for each of the main political parties. This in particular was Germany. And then they fed it content. Each profile would feed it content about its party, using the same kind of parameters, length, frequency, that kind of stuff. Within a very short space of time, within days, every single one of those profiles, irrespective of which party, left, green, whatever, or AFD, which is the far right one, irrespective of what they were posting, within a couple of days, far right AFD-oriented content came to dominate every single one of those 5 media profiles. So that was a curious kind of experiment there. And of course, they're speculating, is it because hate cuts through, the algorithm is fine-tuned to a particularly emotive kind of content? Or is the algorithm stacked against those other parties, and is someone leaning on the scales? They didn't come to conclusion on whether it is a sort of let's say an incidental flaw of the algorithm, or whether it's a hacking of the algorithm. Yeah, some of the comments just asked if I'm from Britain. I think that's kind of clear. Yeah,
I'm not sure if it's even hacking the algorithm so much as why not the other possibility? It's a bot attack, where you can have bots that find any sort of politically themed, if I go on Facebook, I just had a blast because I made a post quoting Pope Leo, because he said some things recently that I thought were pretty notable about, can you really be considered pro-life if you support all the cruelty to immigrants right now in the United States? And I shared it on my Facebook, and immediately I started getting comments, not just from couple of my friends who have strong feelings, but people I've never met before. I closed the comments immediately because I think that there's just people who are attracted to that kind of content.
Yes.
And I could just hear almost in real time people's heads blowing up because they saw something on social media they wanted to respond to and they couldn't. All they could do is just press like and
the usual. Yeah,
the usual. And the other thing that I wanted to hit on is just to kind of bring it back also to the Russian speakers' education, because to me the key to them not being able to be more liberal in their mindset, in spite of being supposedly highly educated, is lack of critical thinking. that is not taught, the critical thinking is not taught, is kicked out of Russian schools. You're supposed to know how physics works so you could build a rocket, you know? You're supposed to know what's the right answer according to like what Dostoevsky said. You can be wrong or you can be right. But, you know, so the idea of asking questions and thinking critically is just not something these people are trained on. Again, red flag for our education system.
I think it is. Absolutely, that hits the nail on the head. And it really leads us to think, you know, what kind of subjects should be actually compulsory, which aren't, you know, should politics be compulsory? The idea that you know, when you start framing rhetorical arguments and you do it, or you're asked to do it for the other person's point of view, that's quite an interesting exercise, because then you see how rhetorical and political speech is manufactured and engineered and engaged, and how it taps into that manipulation. And you know, there are certain things, and history, I think, will be an essential. Philosophy, perhaps at a basic level. These would all seem to be, and encourage creative work or creative thinking
Right.
at the same time. You know, art, music, these kind of things.
Yeah, it's about humanities, because the rest
Mm.
computers can do. But how
Yeah.
to navigate that world of artificial intelligence and humanities, I think, is what makes us human, and it remains really, really crucial to us being able to navigate this technologically advanced civilization, where we're also really quite easy to exploit. You know, because we are still biologically driven, dopamine driven, and we like good things. And you know, I get caught up in sharing news report that turned out to be fake because I really liked it. I will admit it first. I get caught in those too because I'm human. And I think that this is just where we just continually need to train ourselves, like artificial intelligence gets trained. And what are we, like old dogs can't learn new tricks? BS.
I think science as well. I mean, this is again, we emphasize humanities, but I think it was Carl Sagan made the interesting point that we have built a society whose benefits are massively dependent on the scientific process, not the fruits of science, but a scientific process of criticality, which is inherently, I wouldn't even say democratic, but inherently, and everything has to be tested or is testable. You know, there's no narrative that is a given. You know, everything has to prove its worth and can be debunked in a moment when better data comes along. And yet, how many people in the society that is entirely dependent on the fruits of the scientific process have no understanding of what that process is? I think that's an absolute fundamental flaw, which is, as AI, and we're at this critical point where AI is starting to take on some of the grunt work around science, maths, engineering, and computing, which means we're going to be even less in touch with what it takes to build things, and test things, and advance scientific theories. Because we're going to push a button, and it's going to do it all for us.
Yeah. And the only other thing that I can add to this is, you know, thinking about what's going to happen to this country that I'm in, that I'm a proud citizen of, is that the example of Jimmy Kimmel has been kind of a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know, light bulb in this dark room, because it turned out that so far capitalism works. Capitalism still has some influence, and also freedom of speech does still matter. So we're still trying to kind of, you know, it's not happening quite as they would like, but it's happening far faster than we can accept.
Yes, and there's some hope there. And of course, people say, well, hang on a second, isn't Trumpism capitalism? No, I think that's a form of crony corporatism, a form of authoritarian oligarchy. Those are the things that actually are inimical to capitalism itself. That eventually they start stifling innovation. They start stifling the engines of growth and good governance and organization that capitalism actually relies upon to function properly.
Absolutely. Jonathan, thank you so much to you. Thanks to everyone who joined us today and left comments, leaving comments, thinking about leaving. Yeah, go ahead and leave some comments. Thank you. And we'll be back to continue this conversation next time. You never know who's going to join us. I don't know, but I'm hopeful. So, Jonathan, thanks to you. Subscribe, everybody, to Silicon Curtain if you haven't yet, and also Rashkin Report in English. Thanks.
Thank you.